Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Sorry. Hello. Hello everyone. Hello, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well, and welcome to another edition of Late Night Reviews with Jean, where I review something in an ungodly hour. And today, as you can probably tell from my accent and comportment and accessories, I just watched The Crown season 5. Let's talk about it. So The Crown is, of course, a Netflix series that was created by Peter Morgan, and in my opinion is one of the very best Netflix series to have ever been produced. And many of you guys will know how much of a fan I am of The Crown if you've watched my review of season 4 and in fact my review of season 3, which I actually forgot I had done. I was scrolling through my channel trying to find my season 4 review, and I came across the season 3 one as well. So you can check both of them out if you'd like to hear my thoughts on the previous seasons of The Crown. But I am a huge fan, guys. This is one of the very few shows that I actually go back and rewatch time and time again. I have rewatched The Crown from the very beginning, I would say about 4 times at this point. Yeah, from literally the first episode of the first season, I have rewatched it time and time again because I think it's just absolutely superb. And so the expectations were incredibly high for me for this upcoming season. Not to mention the fact that we have reached the era that people are most excited to see depicted on the show. This is the 90s era that focused particularly on Charles and Diana's relationship, or rather the breakdown of their marriage, which was very much publicized, and people were, eager to see how they would cover this topic that was already so scandalous and so well reported at the time. Mind you, the time period in question not being too far back in history, many people still remember the coverage of the Diana and Charles scandals in comparison to the other events that have previously been covered by the series that go back, 70 plus years. Now, of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention that this is the very first season of The Crown that dropped on Netflix after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II in real life. Now, this was a huge globally relevant event due to the popularity and presence of the British royal family throughout the world because of the British Empire. And I wasn't even in the country when it happened, but I was still shaken by the event myself, just because of the the thought of having lost one of the greatest British icons of all time, regardless of my thoughts on the rest of her family. Okay, and the monarchy in general. But no one can deny that she was an icon, and the fact that this season was due to drop a mere 2 months after her death, was surely something that made Peter Morgan sweat through every pore. Literally, I can't imagine that man had a decent night's rest from September till now. Truly, I can't imagine. I think the whole cast was stressed when the Queen passed away. I'm sure they were very sad to see her go, but also just so anxious about the release of this new season. And speaking of the press, I don't usually, read reviews or watch any prior to making my own reviews because I don't want it to influence what I'm going to say. But I did see, rumblings of negative reviews for this new season of The Crown. And so I did have a bit of a skim through a couple of the reviews from newspaper articles and all of that. And I was really disappointed to see how much the real life events, the Queen's actual passing, ended up influencing critics' reviews of this fictional series. I feel like that was out of line. Like, I feel like they really should have drawn a line between reality and this Netflix show, which has never claimed to be a documentary, by the way. Okay, I know that's a whole debate as well, but the fact that these critics were allowing the real life events to sway their opinion of the series is just really bad critique, in my opinion, because they should be two separate things. I saw numerous times that critics in these reviews would claim that parts of the show were disrespectful or tone deaf towards the family, and I'm just like, first of all, the show was made before before the Queen passed away. Like, the series wasn't made in the last 2 months. Clearly, right? The series was not filmed in the last 2 months, so they hadn't anticipated the change in public opinion, okay, the shift in discussion when it came to the royal family upon her passing. But secondly, like I said, these two things should be kept completely separate. I would expect these critics to review this season based off of the storytelling and writing capabilities, and not, you know, with respect to how offended the king might be if he happens to catch it on Netflix. That's not that's not my concern. That has never been my concern, and it has never been the concern of other critics, you know, previously in other seasons. If anything, one of my critiques in other seasons have always been that the show didn't go far enough, and other people agreed with that. You know, we really wanted to see the royal family be explored, warts and all, and in previous seasons there have been times where it's been a little bit sanitized. But the fact that now, because the Queen passed away, people are backtracking and saying like, oh, we should be a bit more respectful. It's like, sir, ma'am. So I was a little bit put off by some of the reviews that I saw about this season, but I did still see some comments and critiques about the show that had nothing to do with whether or not the show was being respectful towards the royal family during this trying time, and everything to do with the quality of the storytelling present in this show. So now that I have seen the entirety of season 5 of The Crown myself, oh, I do have a few concerns. I do have a few questions, queries, concerns to go through here in this review. Before we dive into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And be sure to give this video a like if you enjoy my reviews. It really helps the channel out and it lets me know what you like to see. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into this. So first of all, one of the things that occurred to me when I was watching one of the final episodes of the season was that, you know, one of the main kind of justifications for the monarchy in general is that it's supposed to be this like mainstay of British culture. It's supposed to be this reliable, dependable, stabilizing symbol within British culture that we can just look to as an idealized example of family and religion and leadership, etc., etc. And it occurred to me when I was watching the show that, to me, the Crown had kind of become a very similar symbol. And by the Crown, I don't mean the Crown, I mean the TV show. I feel like the TV show itself had adopted this very same symbolism, especially in the streaming landscape, where it had become so dependable and reliable when it came to the quality of storytelling that you were expecting as a viewer, as a fan, that I was looking forward to every single season when it dropped. Like, it was truly an event when new seasons of The Crown dropped for me. But unfortunately, just like the scandals and hurdles that the royal family have to deal with during the 90s, the period that season 5 covers, I think this season overall presented a bit of a hurdle for the show, in that it's kind of knocked some of that feeling of reliability and stability within the series, because now we have a bit of a dip in quality. And isn't that just a shame? Now, don't get me wrong, the series is still expertly produced with this gorgeous production design, these amazing costumes and recreations of actual outfits worn by members of the royal family. I always love seeing that in The Crown, being able to see how they interpreted the outfits worn by the Queen or by Diana, and kind of adapting that for these actors. It's one of my favorite things about this show, okay? I love the glitz, I love the glamour. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's something that, you know, really makes the show stand out for me. And in particular, as someone who's sometimes obsessed with jewelry, I think I've mentioned this previously on this channel, but I love the recreations of the tiaras that Queen Elizabeth have. Very controversial topic when it comes to royal jewels and the ownership of these jewels, etc. But, you know, the part of me that really appreciates the art, you know, of creating this jewelry, really loved the way that they recreated some of Elizabeth's famous tiaras, even though she was wearing the ugly ones in this era, unfortunately. We see when she goes to Russia, she's wearing the, I think it's the Brazilian blue topaz tiara that she has, that's super ugly, but it was a gift from from Brazil, so whatever. And then she has the other one that was the sapphire necklace tiara that was a wedding gift from George VI. So they recreated those pieces of jewelry very, very well. And yeah, I just appreciate that touch that The Crown has when it comes to its attention to detail. And when it comes to the story this season, there were definitely some bright spots. But funnily enough, when it came to my favorite moments and my favorite episode, they oftentimes didn't have anything to do with the main subject at hand, which was the deterioration of the marriage between Charles and Diana. That whole drama for me, we'll put that in the corner for a second. We'll talk about that later. But for me personally, my favorite episode this season was Mumu. My favorite episode this season was the episode exploring the life of Egyptian millionaire, or perhaps billionaire, Mohammed Al Fayed, who was in fact the father of Dodi, who ended up dating Diana and unfortunately was in that fatal car crash that killed both of them. I really, really loved that episode. To me, this episode harkened back to the best episodes of The Crown from seasons 1 to 4. Episodes like Aberfan from season, I want to say 3, which explores a completely different subject matter, an event in history that has very little to do with the royal family specifically, but there are links here and there, right? And here in the episode Mumu, we see the link is through the Black Valet, the valet that used to work for the Duke of Windsor, who here is once again portrayed by Alex Jennings. I love his portrayal of the character, even though the man himself was scum and a Nazi anyway. But this valet had learned a ton about British society, being a British gentleman and the aristocracy over the years whilst he was working for the Duke, and he was able to transfer this knowledge and information to Mr. Al Fayed, who in this episode, the way that he's depicted, seemed to have a fascination with that entire culture and that society, stemming back from when the British ruled over Egypt. Now here's the thing about this episode, despite the fact that I do have some questions about how historically accurate the events depicted here are, and whether or not the depiction of Mohammed Al Fayed himself is accurate throughout the episode, whether or not he did have a close relationship with this black valet who used to work for the Duke of Windsor. Maybe that is true, but we don't really know what his sentiments towards him were, and we certainly don't know if, you know, Mohammed Al Fayed actually worshipped the royal family in the way that he does in this episode. You know, it's really tough to see how accurate this is. But unlike with Aberfan, where one of the reasons why I love that episode so much in season 3 was because of the accuracy of the series of events and teaching us about this key moment in history that was unfortunately forgotten for many of us in younger generations, here Mumu is a highlight for a completely different reason. First of all, as I alluded to earlier, it was a break from the whole Charles and Diana mess. And even though the character of Mohammed Al Fayed becomes involved in that whole deal later down the line, at this point in time it felt like a step away from all of that. It felt like a step away from the melodrama, and we got to focus on another era of history, that being British occupation of Egypt. And you guys know I love it when The Crown delves into that kind of colonial side of things. I wish it would unpack it in a bit more of an unbiased way, but it doesn't. And that's what I mean, but it could go further. But here we see how, you know, that era of, you know, British occupation really influenced Mohammed Al Fayed into the man that he became, where he even acquired a majority share of Harrods and the Ritz. You know, he was a very wealthy man, and he tried to, you know, garner that ambition and that determination within his son from pretty much the moment that he was born, at least, you know, as it's depicted in this episode. And I have to say, another reason why I really enjoyed this episode was because of the portrayal of Mohammed Al Fayed by Salim Dor. I think this guy did a highlight of the season. Truly, it's astounding, right? It's astounding because, you know, considering the rest of the cast and the characters that they're portraying, you would think that he would just fade into the background, but to me he was definitely one of the highlights. He gave one of the best performances this season, easily. Another episode that stood out to me would be Ipatiev House. That was the episode that dealt with the demise of the Romanov family, and we see, you know, obviously there was a link there between them and the royal family, as King George V was cousins with Tsar Nicholas II, and they even looked very, very similar. I was looking at pictures as well online. I was like, which one is which? I really loved that episode for similar reasons. I found it to be very informative, and it dove into an area of history that I'm not too familiar with. And not only that, but it was one of those episodes of The Crown that connect a historical event that happened decades before the time period covered in that season, and it kind of connects that and draws, you know, comparisons to what's happening contemporarily. And to me, it was genius of them to connect the demise of the Romanovs and the rise of the Russian Revolution to the fall of the Iron Curtain, the end of the Cold War, which brought forth a new era of democracy, in theory, with the first ever democratically elected president of Russia. So having that link be there, to me, was very, very clever. And the fact that you have this extra connection of the relationship between Tsar Nicholas and King George V, I think it just makes for a very nice combination of storylines to tell a very cohesive and informative story. And again, that is where The Crown shines. It's in episodes like this. To me, that's what really makes the series stand out from yet another, you know, biographical show or movie about a, you know, notable person. So now we need to talk about the elephant in the room, right? Now we need to talk about the show's exploration of the deterioration of the relationship between Charles and Diana, which ultimately led in divorce and ultimately led in disaster. Now, when it comes to my thoughts on how this series explored these events, I have some mixed thoughts, honestly. I don't really know how to feel about, well, actually I do. I'll be honest, okay? I didn't love it. I didn't adore it. Here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. I'm British, obviously, as you can hear from my accent, hopefully. Some people have assumed that I'm American still, but anyway, yeah, so I'm British, but I was born in like the late 90s. So like, I don't remember this happening. I just know about it because of the media exposure, even, you know, past Diana's death. This is something that is often talked about, often explored in British media. It was a huge deal, and this is a woman that had a huge impact on the country and indeed the world, to the point where to this day, sis was trending. Sis was trending on Twitter. I saw like fan cast videos being made of her. The new generation is, you know, learning to love and appreciate Diana the way that the old generation did. So this is a woman who has had a huge impact on the world, even beyond the grave. But unfortunately, it did mean that, you know, seeing the way that the show depicted these events, it didn't feel very fresh to me. It didn't feel as exciting. I don't know, like I was really excited to see how the show would depict these events, but I was expecting them to put their like The Crown twist, as the show has done so cleverly in the past. But I just feel like the way that Peter Morgan decided to write and structure these episodes, they seemed very run-of-the-mill in comparison to the innovation that we have seen previously when telling these specific stories about the royal family or about British culture at the time. You know, here, this could have been any old biopic, you know, about the royal family, depicting these events in such a sequential and mundane way. And it's mostly driven by the incredible performances by the cast. But without that, and without the signature The Crown style and production design and costume design, and we're left with a pretty run-of-the-mill depiction of these events, and I just expected more. The fact that we had scene after scene of these two circling one another, being like, I hate you, I hate how this relationship has turned out, you're cheating on me with Camilla, like the fact that this was just going on. I think we could have had one less episode about it. I think that would have helped solve the problem. But if we had just seen a little less of it, I know that that's what people were drawn to, like I know that's what the main event is for this season, but now that we've gotten it, I'm just like, I wish we'd done something else. Because I just got so sick and tired of both of There's just something about this storyline being explored over and over again, you know, after 2 seasons now, that I'm just like, I'm done, I'm good. I'm good now. And when they finally did get a divorce and then they had that other argument, I'm just like, Man, this is harrowing. That's the word. That's the word that I would use to describe that storyline. Harrowing for me as an audience member, and also for them, you know, because they were living it. Okay, so let's move on to my thoughts on the individual characters this season. And first one up we have is, of course, you know, as always, the Queen herself, who is now portrayed by Imelda Staunton, who, by the way, went to the same high school as me. I saw this online. I remember, like, she was in Harry Potter films before, and so when I was going to that secondary school, the teachers were like, yeah, this woman from Harry Potter went to this school. But now they can proudly say that Imelda, who portrayed Queen Elizabeth II in seasons 5 and 6 of The Crown, went to the secondary school. But yeah, so she went to the same secondary school as me, and as a result, I think she can do no wrong. Like, that's not true. When it comes to the 3 actresses who have portrayed Queen Elizabeth II on this show, I still stand by my assessment, a belief that Claire Foy reigns supreme. I'm so sorry. None of the other girlies have been able to match Claire Foy for me personally. And I think personally my order of preference would be Claire Foy here, like off the charts really, and then it would be Olivia Colman, and then it would be Imelda Staunton, even though I love her because she's a fellow alumni, but I just think that there was something missing again from the spark of the character. And I think it is because of the time period covered. It is because of the stage in her life that the Queen was at this time, where she's settled into her role, more than settled. I mean, it's been like 40 years at this point, right? So I understand that we're not going to get the same in-depth character study of Elizabeth II at this point in season 5, you know, especially when there are other members of the family, namely Charles, taking center stage, which is reflective of, you know, how the line of succession works. I still wish that we would have gotten something a little bit more, you know. I feel like with every season that passes with The Crown, I look back at the previous cast and think they were so great. And in terms of the Queen's storyline this season, I mean, it pretty much revolved around her being antiquated and irrelevant now. And fine, you know, I think it's a bit sad that the only storyline that they could come up with for her was the fact that she was getting on. She was like in her 60s at this point. But come to think of it, isn't she supposed to be like 1 week older than she was at the end of season 4? But anyways, but she is getting on in age now, as we see at the beginning of the season, where the doctor is telling her to, you know, be careful around those English muffins. With each cast change, we get a first episode that explores the fact that Liz is getting older. We saw this with season 3, where Olivia Colman is expecting the new postage stamps that reflects her age. But in comparison to that, the first episode of season 5 is nowhere near as kind, I would say. Like, I think the first episode of season 3 was a little bit more dignified in exploring the fact that Liz had now gotten older. And something that's closely tied to Liz's age at this point is the exploration of the general public sentiment towards her reign at this point in time, and the fact that she was actually quite unpopular during the 90s, and people felt like she should make way for the younger generation of royals to take hold instead. But Liz had made a lifelong commitment to be the monarch, so she wasn't planning on abdicating, unlike some other European monarchs that we saw during the time. And so the show explores the public sentiment towards her reign, you know, 40 years on, and the fact that people felt like the monarchy needed some new fresh blood, right? But again, this is a subject that has been explored many times on The Crown previously when it comes to the character of Elizabeth, but ultimately it was shown, you know, in real life that that was the best way forward for the monarchy, especially considering how the show is asking us to posit what it would be like to have Charles at the head of the monarchy instead of Elizabeth. But that's not the right time to ask that question, considering the scandal. Okay, like how can we even engage in this thought experiment when we take a look at how shambolic his life is at this point in time? It would have been another thing if he was like the model prince, right? Like if he was doing everything right, if he had abided by the rules, but he just wanted to, you know, adjust things things and introduce change into the institution to reflect the realities of that day, you know, the contemporary life of British people. But no, instead he made a shambles of his marriage. Okay, he's ridiculed the royal family at this point with all the scandals surrounding him, and yet he has the audacity to imply that his mother's time has run out because she's old-fashioned. Like, I would take old-fashioned over scandalous and unreliable any day of the week, and clearly so did the rest of the British public. So moving on to Charles himself, who was definitely the star of the show this season, and he is now being portrayed by Dominic West, who I think does a decent job. I don't think he's quite as sympathetic as Josh O'Connor's iteration of the character, if I'm being honest. That could be a good thing or a bad thing, especially considering people's, you know, real life perceptions of Charles. The thing that annoyed me about Charles though is, first of all, again, we're circling, you know, the whole Diana Charles storyline far too many times, but also the added aspect of the change storyline, the idea that he was a champion for change, he wanted to introduce change, he wanted to bring the monarchy into the millennium, blah 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 blah. The whole time I was like, what change are you gonna bring about, sir? Like, you're still in the institution. Like, you don't want to see it go away, because that means you lose your title. That means you lose your peerages. That means you lose all of your benefits and privileges. You are not a revolutionary. You are not a radical. Like, I don't know what changes he wanted to make to really make a huge difference in the fabric of British society. He just wanted more of the same, but just adjusted to his needs. It was giving very Henry VIII. That's the energy that Charles was giving. It was giving very Henry VIII, where Henry VIII wanted to be able to divorce his first wife so that he could try again for a male heir, and he created a whole ass religion out of it. Okay, he divorced from the Catholic Church and decided to set up the Church of England, where he would be allowed to divorce, you know, his first wife. That's what Charles is giving me, especially with the interview that we saw where he was talking about being the defender of all faiths. It's the same Henry VIII energy, where you're supposed to be the defender of the Church of England in the case of Charles, but he's decided to change it so that it suits his needs for divorce from Diana. So this whole talk about change and entering the millennium with a brand new monarchy, a new Britain, all of that he was promising, I just found to be very unconvincing. I think the show could have done a slightly better job of explaining what Charles's agenda actually was. Like, what is the change that he wanted to introduce? I mentioned in my review of season 4 that one of the things that he was an advocate for is kind of streamlining the monarchy so that it would be focused on the line of succession, which coincidentally is he is the head of that line of succession now, right? He went to 2 different prime ministers. He went to John Major and Tony Blair the second that he became prime minister, just, you know, looking for this change, looking to unthrone his own mother, to usurp her literally while she was still alive. And then finally, when it comes to the 3 main characters this season, we of course have the one, the only Princess Diana, as portrayed by Elizabeth Debicki. Now, Liz had a tough act to follow in light of how incredible Emma Corrin's debut of young Diana was in season 4, but I think just based off of aesthetics, she was down for the task, okay? Because truly that is perfect casting. Aside from the fact that she's so tall, I think it was perfect casting just aesthetically, because Elizabeth Debicki just looked so similar to Diana. Also, side note, speaking of Elizabeth Debicki, I actually happened to run into her. I happened to run into her earlier this year. I was on my walk during my lunch break, just minding my business, and I just see this tall, thin woman, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. She was really low-key, and I don't live in like central London, like Piccadilly Circus or anything like that. I do live centrally, but it's not in like the hotspot places where you would expect to see a celebrity. So I really was not sure. I was like, is that her? But she would be here because she's filming The Crown. I was so unsure. But it was so weird seeing her on screen after seeing her in person. She looked completely different, but I think she knocked it out of the park. Not only did the costume, hair and makeup people did a fabulous job kind of recreating Diana's iconic looks this season, but I think Elizabeth's actual performance was incredible, and she perfectly embodied Princess Diana. But also another thing that I really loved about this performance is that she added personality that wasn't strictly just like stereotypical Diana. And I think that's what has been missing from previous depictions of her. Like the fact that she was a little bit, she was a little bit playful. She played little pranks here and there, like when she met with Dr. Khan in the cinema and she was behind him and she just kind of tapped him on the shoulder saying, "Aren't you going to say hello?" Like just little moments like that made her feel like a well-rounded person and not just a caricature. Now, when it came to Diana's story this season, this was of course the meat of the Diana storyline, right? Like the fact that you had the famous interview, the ill-begotten interview, and for those of you who don't know, perhaps you're not in the UK, there was a whole investigation. There was a public inquiry about how this interview was obtained. I think like last year or earlier this year, I can't remember, but it was very recent, and the results were quite damning for the BBC. It was really, really bad for Martin Bashir for sure, and I think that's why they touch upon it here in this season. I think if it had been several years earlier, we would have just gotten, the interview recreated, but the fact that the show goes to painstaking lengths to show how the interview was obtained from Diana in this deceitful way and this manipulative way is a result of the public inquiry that came out a couple of years back, or maybe even this year. So it was really despicable to see the lengths that Martin Bashir went to make sure Diana did the interview with him in the BBC as opposed to going to other networks, perhaps even in America. But then of course you have that recreation of the interview itself, which I think was done very, very well. I mean, the clips have been circulating now for days, with comparisons with the real interview and Elizabeth Debicki's recreation of Diana's mannerisms in the interview, and it's just like pretty much spot on. Like this is just the tip top of acting right there for me. And finally, when it comes to the rest of the cast, I mean, I don't really have many notes here, honestly. We have, of course, the return of Prince Philip, who is now portrayed by Jonathan Pryce. I think he was a very, very good Philip. Again, I don't think he's quite as good as Tobias Menzies, and certainly not as good as Matt Smith. Sorry. But he's a Philip in a different stage of his life, although maybe he's still up to no good with the whole potential affair thing with that young woman. It seemed like it was just a friendship though, so maybe he has learned his lesson. I don't know. It's just like we're rehashing the same thing over and over again. We already had the whole Philip is cheating storyline in season 2, so like, why are we doing this again? And it's the same thing with the whole he's bored of being in the Queen's shadow storyline as well. Like, we've been there, we've done that. Now Philip is at the stage where he's embarking on his own journeys, doing whatever the hell he wants, and the Queen just has to come to terms with that, and she does. And we get that episode where he's it's like horse driving. He's on the honestly, it may have been even worse than the moon landing episode that we got in season 3, where he was having a midlife crisis there. But fine, whatever. We need to have a Prince Philip episode every season where he's doing something wild and wacky, I guess. And it was a similar thing for Princess Margaret as well, who's now portrayed by Leslie Manville. She also had the rehashing of her love story with Peter Townsend, who here is portrayed by Timothy Dalton. That's fun. Isn't he like a James Bond? That's it, he was a James Bond. They rehashed that whole story, and she's upset with the Queen once again about the fact that, she didn't allow her to marry Peter when they were younger, and now everyone's getting divorced here, there, everywhere, and she's pissed. And honestly, rightfully so. Although I will say, to the Queen's defense, if I was the Queen and Margaret was talking to me like that, like she was in the Annus Horribilis episode, I would have just been like, it was 40 years ago, sis. I'm so sorry, sis, but it was 40 years ago. Like, the times have changed. Divorce is far more common now, as we saw in the divorce episode. So, like, yeah, there's a wider context that needs to be taken into consideration here. Obviously, the situations are very similar with Princess Anne, but it's just a different time. And she, fortunately, is able to take advantage of that, whereas for you, it was a huge disadvantage. Like, that's what I would say to Margaret, but maybe that would just piss her off. I don't know. And speaking of Margaret, I did just want to mention that I did find it a bit funny how the actress who portrays Princess Anne in this season, at this period of her life, looks so similar to the actual Princess Margaret. Like I was so confused at first. Like when I first saw her, I think her name is Claudia Harrison. When I first saw her, I was like, oh, she's depicting this new version of Princess Margaret, but she looks significantly younger than Queen Elizabeth. Like, what's going on here? But in actuality, she was depicting Princess Anne, and I thought she would have made a dead ringer for Princess Margaret when she was slightly younger than what she is in season 5. I think if it wasn't for Helena Bonham Carter being cast in that role for seasons 3 and 4, she would have made a great Princess Margaret for that time period. But overall, when it comes to season 5 of The Crown, I think it did a lot of things right. I was very interested in the time period being explored here. This was, of course, a very hot moment for the royal family where its very integrity was being questioned. There were divorces left, right and center. It seemed very unstable and the, opposite of what it had tried to be for the majority of Elizabeth's reign. And it just felt like everything was coming crashing down, leading all the way up to that annus horribilis that Elizabeth described in her speech. So that was a very promising premise for the 5th season of the show, but I'm not quite sure if they fully delivered on that. Whilst I think, of course, that the production design and costume design, hair and makeup, performances, all the technical aspects of the show were still on par with the previous seasons, I think that some of the creative choices just weren't as inspired and innovative as they have been previously, and it made for a very run-of-the-mill telling of an extremely well-known series of events that has permeated through pop culture for the last 30 years. And so with all of that being said, guys, I'm going to be giving The Crown season 5 a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on season 5 of The Crown, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this season down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.